Hello, everyone. Welcome to the European Friendly Edition, Tuesday, February 6th of the Gateway API Sync. As always, this meeting is governed by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, boiling down to effectively be nice to one another. So please do be nice to one another. If at any point you have questions or want to interject into a conversation, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom, as that helps us to kind of organize and kind of keep things flowing properly. It is an open agenda. We have a few items on the agenda for today. If you want to add something, feel free. Put it at the bottom of the list, and if we can get to it today, we will. If not, we can always roll it over to the next meeting. We have these meetings weekly. All right, and with that, we'll go ahead and get started on the agenda, which I'll share here. Let me know if that's working. Thanks everybody who puts their name in the attendees. It's just helpful to kind of keep track of like who's involved, who's showing up, who's showing up for this meeting in particular, because we're still considering whether we would do more European-friendly time zone meetings. And so this is a pretty good turnout. I think I saw 20 on the Zoom, so that's pretty good.
Haven't we always had good turnout for this time slot?
Yeah. And
Yes.
I think if we keep doing it consistently, then yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I freely admit to being biased because this time slot is the one that does not interfere with dinner and things like that on the US East Coast. So I would love to see more of these, but we've gotten really good turnout on all of these that I remember. So it would be nice to just go ahead and pull the trigger on that.
Yeah. Thomas, if you're here, you wanted to do a 10 to 15 minute presentation of the Quadrant project, and that's our first item up.
Cool. Yeah, and the good news is that it's not me who's going to do the presentation. It's going to be David, who's also in the call. Can do a very short introduction. So actually, the other day we were in the network call talking about Quadrant, and we jumped on the invitation to present ourselves a little bit more in this call. Basically, we're all about policies, not the implementation of Gateway API, but like what can we do with policies that make life better for developers and platform engineers. And we're hard at work. And to tell you more about that, I'll give it to you, David. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. Just do a quick check to make sure people can see the slides in full screen there. All good?
Back.
Good to go.
Okay. Let's go for it. So yeah, I'll get a bit of help from probably a couple other people on the call as well throughout the slides, but I'll try to keep it less than 10 minutes and keep people interested. So Quadrant, give a little bit of a project overview, and we'll show some technical stuff as well. So what is it? So our short answer is our tagline. It's policies for Kubernetes gateways. Kind of a longer version of that. So it's a set of Kubernetes controllers, services, and APIs that provide gateway policies for existing Kubernetes Gateway API implementations on both single and multi-cluster environments. So the multi-cluster element, that's kind of important to us to allow you to scale up those policies easily as your needs arise. And the main way we're doing this is through meta resources and policy attachments. So the Gateway Enhancement Proposal 713, there's a lot of stuff in that, and that's kind of the meat of what we would rely on with our policies. So here's a kind of a high-level architectural overview of, let's say, the Quadrant pieces. So the top part here is like we'll say the Quadrant control plane. The bottom part is the data plane. In the top part, this is your policy, where your policy controllers live, where you're kind of configuring your policies. And the bottom part is where you're enforcing those policies. So policy configuration point versus policy enforcement point, using those kind of terms. And your gateway kind of, I guess that sits in between, in that our policy controllers may need to configure some aspect of the gateway. Your traffic comes through the gateway, and there's some components that need to enforce that policy then at at say the time the traffic's coming through. So some of the APIs we have this rate limit policy. So this hopefully self-explanatory. In here, you target you can target HTTP route. You can also target a gateway if you want. Then you can specify limits for different paths here. So for example, we have our get inventory path and we have our route selector. Down here, we have, say, if any get requests going to this particular path, if it's an exact match, we want to do some rate limiting. And the example rate limiting at the bottom here, it's saying 10 requests per every 10 seconds. Those units are configurable then if you want to go with like minutes, hours, etc. You can do that kind of thing. So that's the basis of the rate limit policy. So you don't need to worry about what's actually doing the rate limiting under the hood. You have this
really quick question.
Yeah.
And I apologize if you said this while I was typing in another window. The get inventory stanza key there is purely just for the use of the humans remembering what they're doing, right?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, okay, just making sure. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So that's the rate limit policy. So next we have an auth policy. So auth in the sense of authentication and authorization. So similarly, you have a target ref here, in this case, targeting HTTP route. In this example, I have two examples here. So I have an authentication one and an authentication one and an authorization one. So if we focus on the authentication one first, this example is showing how you could use like a custom header for an API key, just to keep it simple. But there are a bunch of other things that are supported as well, such as like Kubernetes token review, JWT, OIDC, OAuth2, a few other bits and pieces. So like the rate limit policy, down the bottom here, you have these route selectors. In this case, I'm not specifying paths, but you could do that if you want. Here, I'm just specifying particular methods for traffic coming through. So before moving on to the authorization policy, Guy, is there anything you wanted to add there that I may not have mentioned?
Well, not really. And the next example, it's only to highlight the fact that in a single policy resource, users can combine both authentication and authorization, which kind of helps for making direct references such as this one that you see on the screen where it says auth.identity.asadmin and so on.
Thanks, Guy. So in this case here, yeah, you can see you can specify some rego to do something a little more complex, shall we say. So that's the auth policy.
Another question, David, just a heads up.
Oh, in the chat, is it?
No, sorry, I just raised my hand. You may already be getting here, and sorry if I cut out. It looks like my internet is not great. But just wondering, like, you may have already covered this, or you may be covering this. How on earth does this hook into gateway implementations? Like, is this just kind of an external call out somehow, like xproc or something like that to Quadrant?
So it would so under the hood it uses say a WASM shim, we would call it, and that would hook into Envoy proxy. So as the requests are coming through, my understanding is it would make a call out to one of our components, like to do limiting. There's a component called limitador, or for the auth piece, it would call out to Authorino. So it kind of proxies through that. Did I get that right, Guy?
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. I also would like to highlight that those components that you mentioned, the one that delivers the rate limiting functionality and the one that delivers auth, they also implement Envoy APIs for those purposes. So for the ones familiar with the Envoy configuration, you may remember that there's this kind of Envoy filter called global rate limiting, another one called external authorization. So these are the APIs that those components implement.
So to state the obvious, if you're not using Envoy, then
It is still a
Do you
good
end up
question.
having to I should phrase that differently. Are you simply out of luck, or can you deploy a quadrant proxy to implement this stuff, or what does that look like? Says the guy who works for Buoyant on Linkerd.
No,
Lynn
good
would like you
question.
to do it in eBPF, actually, I'm sure.
That's where our WASM module come in, right? So hopefully that will eventually become portable enough so we can roll that out for other implementations as well. As of today, to be fair, we have to say that the only Gateway API implementation that we support is Istio, because we also depend on all the APIs from Istio, such as, for example, for enabling external authorization in the Envoy-based Istio proxy, we rely on the Istio authorization policy, if you're familiar with it.
Gotcha.
Go ahead,
We
Ray.
have another question. We probably should
Sorry,
let them.
yeah. I know we're okay. We are at time, so I'll follow up offline. But thank you, anyways. This is really cool.
Definitely cool.
Yeah, please continue though.
Cool. Yeah, so a couple more policy types we have. We have a DNS policy. So this one, like you could just use external DNS in your cluster if you want, but this kind of abstracts that out to an API. So you can have something else managing DNS for your HTTP routes or your listeners. So when you scale up to multiple clusters, you can bring in some other elements such as load balancing or geo-based traffic routing. There's a TLS policy as well. So the TLS policy, so I think the simplest way of kind of putting this is it's an integration between Cert Manager and Gateway API. Now there are annotations on that you can add onto Gateway API resources to get a Cert Manager like integration already that Cert Manager supports. So this is just taking that out to a separate resource. So you have a specific API around that. So that's probably the best way I could summarize that. That one is very useful in, say, the multi-cluster environment as well, because it can start to push down your certs to multiple clusters, manage them centrally. So yeah, as I said, this is all based on policy attachment. Guy, do you want to jump in here and say a little bit more about this and say defaults and overrides?
Yeah, of course, sure. So I would like to leave you guys with a few notes on how we're doing policy attachment, right? You saw in the example shared by David before, examples of policies targeting gateways, targeting HP routes. And this is the current state of our implementation, starting with this one limitation that we currently have, which is no more than one policy of a kind per target resource, meaning you cannot have two policies, two rate limit policies, for example, targeting the same gateway or the same HP route, right? For the last two kinds of policies explained by David, the DNS policy, the TLS policy, you can only target gateways as of today, and it's an implementation of what's been called a direct policy attachment only. Whereas the rate limit policy and the auth policy, you can target both gateways and HP routes with effect throughout the hierarchy, right? There's a currently work in progress for extending support for gRPC routes, which may coincide with that API by Gateway API becoming GA, right? But currently for gateways and HP routes, as for rate limit policy and auth policy, there's something that it's not really direct policy attachment nor inherited policy attachment as they are described in GEP 713, right? But it's kind of something in between. We're doing implicit defaults when you target a gateway. So there's no defaults and overrides currently in our APIs. So when you target a gateway, that works as an implicit default. And then other policies can be defined at a more specific level, fully replacing that policy, the default policy set for the more general level. So that's how it currently works. So therefore, there's no merges between policies that we currently support, right? In the long run, these are the set of use cases that we would like to be able to support, leveraging defaults and overrides somehow, right? So the first one is the only one that we currently actually support, where, by the way, PE stands for platform engineer, and you may find some application developers there somewhere. So the first use case is this kind of our baseline, where the platform engineer sets a default gateway policy that is fully replaced by a more specific one set at the level of the gateway, at the level of the routes, sorry. That is slightly different from setting individual gateway defaults that can be not only replaced, but sometimes also disabled and expanded with more specific rules at the level of the routes. Keep in mind that by only targeting each target resource once, right, we have to deal with this fact that sometimes one big policy resource contains multiple rules. It's a set of rules, but some of the rules you can replace, others you cannot replace. We also have platform engineers setting policy constraints that must be fulfilled by the application developers, such as not only defaults, but minimum and maximum values within which the application developers can operate. Setting overrides, full overrides, right, at the level of the gateway that cannot be neither disabled, replaced, or expanded in any way. Individual overrides at the level of the gateway that can later that cannot be disabled or replaced, but it can still be expanded with more specific rules at the level of the root. And finally, all the complements for the above, right? I mean, the use cases from the perspective of the application developers who set or expand or replace those specific policies and individual policy rules by targeting the roots.
Cool. Thanks, Guy.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much everything I wanted to kind of share. So there's a few links here. We can drop them into the notes as well.
I was going to ask if you had a Kubernetes channel. Good. So yeah.
We do. We got that set up last year, and we've moved all of our upstream chat over there. So
very cool.
It's a good place to find us.
Yeah, I remember meeting with you, David, like a year ago. You and I went into multi-cluster SIG for a little bit. And tried to work on stuff.
Yeah, MCS API.
It's very, very cool to see how it's coming along. Thank you for demoing today. Because we're kind of low on time, we're going to skip, I think, questions. We have a lot on the agenda still, but they have a Kubernetes channel, Quadrant, #Quadrant. Please join in there and let them know your questions and follow up. Thank you guys so much for demoing today. We appreciate it.
Good stuff. Thanks.
Cheers.
All right. Candace would like to talk about best practices for updating API versions when updating, implementation versions. I'm going to share my screen again, unless you'd like to, Candace, because you're trying to share something.
No, not trying to share something, but okay. This can be low on the list. Doesn't have to be something that
that's okay.
We take
let's
time away.
Let's go for it.
Okay.
We'll manage our time. I think we'll be okay. Let's go for it. And if we have to kind of, rein it in a little bit and continue it later, that's okay. All right. So yeah, go ahead though.
Okay. So we have an integration with Gateway API that does installation. It installs its own Gateway API CRDs, and then it installs the Gateway API implementation that we're using, and it happens that when we upgrade to the next version.
Hey Shane, you're sharing a black screen. Sorry, Candace.
That's Zoom
on
no problem. Linux being hilarious. Hang on. Go on.
Right. So
there we go.
So the installed CRDs are not exactly matching the implementation CRDs, and from within the implementation that we chose I didn't see any warnings, alerts, but there were, problems running things. I wanted to just find out how are other implementers handling the situation, especially upgrades, from a previous version of Gateway API into the GA version of Gateway API. And just start a discussion on it.
Yeah, we've really lacked good guidance on what to do here, and that is on all of us. Well, me, I'll say, but any of us as maintainers. But my idea, which I had in my head, is very much that when we introduce a new API version, it is generally safest to not upgrade your implementation to use that version right away so that you can support a wider range of CRDs. We never wrote that down anywhere or not clearly enough. I think that may be something that's documented in, say, Kubernetes upstream, but we haven't CRDs are a little different and funny in that sense. But what has caused the most pain?
Sorry, can you say that one more time? Release a new CRD version and then don't start using it is what I think you just said. I need some more words around this, Rob.
Fair. There's a difference, and I probably didn't communicate it well, but what I'm meaning is a new API version. So when we added V1 as an API version, instead of using that right away, because if you move your implementation to read and write from V1, that means you can only support the CRDs that are released at V1.0. If on other hand, you continue to read and write from V1 beta 1, even though you might be using like the latest release, have V1.0 of Gateway API, whatever, but you're just reading and writing from V1 beta 1, those are compatible all the way back to V0.5. And so you support a much wider range of CRDs and you don't really need to think about it. We have not announced any plans, and I don't have any plans myself to ever deprecate or get rid of V1 beta 1. So honestly, in that case, I think it's likely safest to continue reading and writing from that to maximize the support range.
When you say reading and writing, I'm hearing you support V1. I don't remember the verb for it. You're willing to support V1 and V1 beta 1, but you're using V1 beta 1 as the storage version, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's an implementation detail. If users have V1 installed, they can use it and they won't know that your controller's, reading and writing from V1 beta 1. They'll just know when they installed V0.8 CRDs, your controller still worked. That's the only thing. That's the only way they'll know.
Yeah. Mike notes disambiguating controller read write versus end user would help, and I completely agree with that. The end user should expect to be able to use V1 even if you're using V1 beta 1 as a storage version.
Yes, 100,000. Yes. It's mostly just from a controller perspective. If you want to be able to support the widest range of CRDs, using the V1 beta 1 APIs will do that for you.
Keith, sorry, Keith, you've had your hand up for a little bit. If you want to go ahead while I try to assemble some thoughts. Maybe Keith doesn't want to go ahead. Maybe Keith has forgotten to unmute.
Give him a second.
Keith says he can't unmute. Oh, that's fascinating.
That happened to me.
Oh, there we go.
That was so weird. No, not Outlook. It was
Microsoft, man. Microsoft is messing with you.
I'll send you a copy of
I was clicking the button.
Keith, don't worry.
Yeah.
I was clicking the unmute button, and strangely enough, it was like saying this meeting is recorded and not letting me. It was strange. It's like it thought it was the leave meeting button. Anyway, yeah. So Rob, my question is around. I thought, and this is probably just ignorance on my part, I thought if you read V1 in your controller, but V1 beta 1 is still a CERD version, then your user should be able to, in theory, write and read from V1 beta 1, right?
Yeah, you're
Or
completely
is that
right.
not how
The
that
problem,
works?
no, you're absolutely right. If you're reading and writing from V1, customers, users can still read and write from V1 beta 1 or V1. The problem
can
is,
we be much more specific about this? If the storage version is V1 beta 1, but you also have and somebody help me out with the verb for the other one, right? The supported version, you are allowed
Served
to
version.
served version, thank you. Then your user is allowed to transmit a resource to etcd that says it is V1, and it will get transparently turned into a V1 beta 1 resource before it is stored, with conversion webhooks happening if there are any, but oh dear God, let's not, that's a disaster.
Correct. I'm asking about the reverse situation though. So if you have,
if you
go ahead, Rob, I think you're addressing it.
Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah. So you're completely right. So in any case, users can read and write from V1 beta 1 or V1 if they have V1.0 CRDs. That much is true. The problem is when users, clusters, whatever, do not have V1.0 CRDs. If they don't have V1.0 CRDs, the only thing they can read and write from is V1 beta 1. And so your controller is going to break poorly if they don't have the latest CRDs.
Or you can write your controller to, I have to figure out.
Yeah, or you could write your controller to fall back and do both, but that's even worse.
Well, but the problem is that if V1 has added something that is not present in V1 beta 1, then I think you have to have the controller.
Then you have to have the conversion web.
Yeah.
Correct,
sure,
but you should never do that.
Exactly. So
you don't like conversion webhooks?
Yeah.
Well, you should never add something going between minor version to major version. So if you're going to add from going from V1 beta 1 to V1, it should be like an exact promotion. If you're going to add a field or remove a field, that should be a new. Well, adding a field doesn't matter as much, but that should be a new Simver. If you're adding a field.
I was specifically talking about adding a version because that kind of has to be okay. You kind of have to be able to add things into V1 that were not in V1 beta 1.
Yes. So, well, but here's the thing. When we add new fields, they go to V1 and V1 beta 1. Those API versions are going to be identical forever. We have aliasing between them. So
that's what I don't understand, because all the pointers from V1 beta 1 goes to V1. So for example, like I'm not really sure understanding the situation right now, because I saw many references, for example, in a recent Istio for V1 beta 1 and some references for V1. But then I go to the V1 beta 1 and all pointers to V1. So I'm not really sure I understand how to avoid the problem.
I think this is entirely on me to write something, and I want to do a time check. And I think if I write it down in a few paragraphs, it'll be easier than me trying to explain it, because I'm not doing a good job. But yeah.
Well, and because we're being a tough audience, let's be clear.
Well, I think it's reasonable. It's a rough edge that shouldn't be quite as rough as it is.
Yeah.
But we are running really short on time for it, and I don't think Candace is getting an answer other than everybody's kind of dealt with it a little bit of a different way. But for the most part, if you have support in your for the V1, the V01 CRDs, you should be able to do backwards compatibility. Is that what where we're at basically? We just need to write that down, kind of how it should work.
Yeah, we need. I'll create an issue, assign it to myself, and write this up.
Okay.
There's
Candace, is that a good follow-up for you, Candace? Or is there anything more that you kind of wanted to get through here?
I think even so, if we have something written down, that it might take a while for everybody to be caught up to that, right? For every implementation to be caught up to that, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
By the way, Rob, are you talking only about the way the controller stores the resource?
Only the way that the controller communicates with API server. So read and write requests to API server.
I see.
All right. Let's I think we still have quite a few issues on the agenda, so let's move this into the issue that Rob is going to create. Thank you, Rob. And then thank you, Candace, for bringing this up. And sorry to everyone that it's in a little bit of a rough shape. We will start working on that. Next on the agenda, if I can find my agenda, is talking about V1.1. Do you want, I talked about this at the last one. Do you want to drive a little bit on this, Rob, or do you want me to do it?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. Let me, I don't know if you want to share, if I can do it. 1 second.
I was going to just give you a co-host.
No, that's great.
Ta-da! You're a co-host.
How exciting. All right, let me go ahead and share screen and hopefully not share all kinds of, let's see. I have way too many windows open, apparently. I think I got the right
Story
Rob
one.
of
doesn't
my
want to share
life.
his Rob doesn't want to share his Pal World collection yet, not until he gets all the
Yeah,
epics.
that's right. All right, well, hopefully
I
everyone
mean,
can see
that's
my screen all
understandable,
right.
right?
I just wanted to again remind everyone that we have this Get project board here. We are, running back in time. I think what we said is in February, our primary focus is doing what we can to get everything that is experimental that can graduate to standard this month, and we are in that month now. So if you go over to the project board and you sort by what we are targeting as a next transition, you can see we've got at least three gaps that we want to move on. One is conformance profiles. Mattia and Shane have a PR that updates graduation criteria. It's really, they've done a phenomenal job with this gap. I think it's a good reference, updating changelog, having, if you look at the GEP issue itself, there's a subtask list in here, which is really handy to see, kind of what's left, what we're doing, etc. I think this is in good state, on track. gRPC route, the biggest gap here is that we've needed conformance tests. Last week, Richard added gRPC route conformance tests in a PR, which is awesome. But they need review, and if you're an implementation that is supporting gRPC route, I would strongly encourage you to take a look at this so that we're not adding conformance tests that are surprising it or unexpected for you. Because that is something like, by the very nature of this timeline that we're trying to get merged in this month, preferably early this month, so that we can make sure we have enough room for new gaps to come in. Because what we're saying is we get gaps out of experimental, and those create slots for new gaps to come into experimental. And then the last one here is route port matching. This is really, really, really looking for new or existing contributors to take up the last tiny bits that are needed for getting this across the line. I think there's a lot of interest in getting this across the line. So if anybody has some cycles and wants to help move this across, it would be a huge win, and it would open up a slot for a new experimental gap to get in.
And you will get help with it if you need it. It's not like you take it and you'll be stranded. John Howard has done some work on it, and we can, between all of us, including John, us the maintainers, we will support you in it if you want to take it on.
Yep. Cool.
So it needs,
and then
it needs some conformance work and documentation. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, that's exactly correct. It needs a small, I think we already have some conformance tests. We may need to just expand or finish those out just a little bit, but it's pretty close, I think. And then we're completely lacking documentation on it. So, yeah.
Okay.
And it doesn't, the same person doesn't have to do both of those things, but if you want to volunteer for just one, anything helps just to get this across the line and open up a slot for something else in the API. And
what
then
timeline are we? Sorry, what timeline are we
so,
thinking of for 1.1?
We are trying to get all of these experimental gaps across the line this month, preferably earlier in the month, so that we can have more time to move, provisional gaps into experimental. So that in particular, session persistence, this client cert verification for gateway listeners, and I think we TBD on what the third one is. So I guess that's one we still need a bit more discussion on. I know there's a doc from an earlier meeting that has some ideas of what else might fit well in 1.1, but I don't think there's any clear decision there, so can still make a case.
When are we targeting 101?
So I think we said March, or
Ideally before or like during KubeCon Paris.
yeah,
See
I
if
mean,
that
usually we
works out.
try and have like at least an RC out for KubeCon Paris, for KubeCon. So I think at this point we're looking at an RC. So that means, really need to make sure we have these GEPs across the line this month and ideally in the next 2-3 weeks.
So I think there might be a chance that the supported features will move on from experimental by then, because we have 2 PRs in flight for Envoy and Istio, while we're just locked on one issue with the API in Gateway with the queue builder validation. So once that's solved, we might be able to merge supported features.
Oh yeah, no, I think supported features is pretty stable and a good candidate, but the problem is we have a 6-month soak time requirement. So I think since it just came in 1.0, I don't think we can bump it up quite yet.
Yeah, our probationary period to try to give people a chance to catch up and also find some way to check back in with these things so they don't get out of band.
Yeah.
So,
oh man,
yeah.
So yeah, I know we're close to time here, so let me just mention, I linked to Richard's gRPC route conformance test PR here. I took a quick look at it, but there's a lot in here, including a new echo server, a new image for conformance tests, which I would love to avoid, but I need to chat with Richard to see if we have any path with any of our existing echo servers. Yeah, and then I also wanted to call out one of the things that we're hoping to have a meaningful release in 1.1 is Gaurav's Gateway Cuddle. Well, this is the entire community, but right now Gaurav is leading Gateway Cuddle. And so he's added what I would call a very exhaustive GEP for Gateway Cuddle. And this is not really meant to graduate in the standard sense, but it's just meant to be kind of similar to the initial Gamma GEP, but something like a memorandum to say, this is a thing we're doing, this is why, and this is what we think is in scope. There's a lot in here. And if this is an area you've been interested in getting involved, I strongly recommend taking a look at what Gaurav kind of has as a vision for where this can go, because this is something that can really benefit and really, if you actually want to just write code for Gateway API instead of documentation or API, this is a great opportunity for you. So yeah. Okay, I think that's everything, and I think I took lots of time. So any open questions, comments, concerns on this one? Oh, I just saw Keith's comment here. Once gRPC routes conformance tests are finished, what's left? That's a great question. So gRPC route has amazing documentation. Thank you, Richard. And it has enough soak time. It's been in for forever, 060. The conformance tests are the missing piece mostly, but we have said that you don't just need conformance tests, you need implementations passing your conformance tests before you can get to standard. So we're actually looking at a pretty tight turnaround of not just getting the conformance tests in, but then also turning around and confirming that at least a couple implementations are passing those conformance tests before we can graduate this to GA. So yeah, a call out to the implementations that have support for gRPC route already or are planning it. Would be really great to get feedback from you that one, these tests make sense, and two, your implementation can pass them. Yeah.
What was the bar for implementations? We already have 3 there. I vaguely
Yeah, I think
that was enough.
I think it says several, which I've interpreted as more than 2. So 3 is basically the bar.
Okay.
That's it. Yeah.
I mean, obviously more is better.
Yes, exactly. All right. Well, I think that's all for me. Let me hand it back over to Shane, if you're good with that.
3 is a pattern, so it's a pretty good number, I think, to call the baseline. So if you have a pattern of implementations that are all basically able to do the same thing. All right, let's go back and keep going here. Hopefully you can see that it's not doing the Zoom breakage thing.
Yeah, it worked.
Dave, you want to talk about merging gateways gap?
Yeah, it's sort of like a PSA. This gap's kind of old, so I can recap what the problem is. There's a limit on listeners. Knative in namespace provisions certs from Let's Encrypt, and like previously with existing implementations, we support like thousands of potential certs in a single cluster. Gateway currently has a limitation where you can have 64 listeners. These are distinct certs that are fully qualified. So there's a need for merging GEPs. I kind of like dropped the ball on this in the past. Someone paid me about it recently, and I also have a use case now for like having the references like a parent-child relationship be cross namespace as well, which I kind of commented on the issue, not an issue, but on the PR comment. So if you take a look at that, so I made the necessary changes for that, and I just kind of posted it. So. You just scroll up.
Yeah, thanks for the
Nope.
update here. I'm a little curious. I've lost, similarly, I've lost a bit of track on merging multiple gateways. One of the things that would be helpful here as we're trying to prioritize gaps is understanding the interest level for this gap in particular. So if people can comment on the actual gap number, so that's 1713, sorry. That would really help. Comment or sometimes even just a reaction or thumbs up on the GitHub issue that's tracking the gap itself helps just gauge interest level in something. Or if you have a greater interest, like this is something I really need, adding a comment on that gap can help us understand where this falls in terms of priority.
I'll give it a look back
Yeah, I
over,
was just
but I
gonna
agree with Rob. Like trying to assess the interest level is probably important, because I think this kind of not to be whatever, but I think this kind of that because we didn't have too many allies all grouping together and saying, yeah, we all need this, right? That's kind of where we left off with this.
One of the interesting things we ran across with Linkerd as well recently was looking at some of this stuff and realizing that there's an unintended consequence of some of those, oh, let's limit this to 16, where as soon as you limit it to such a small number, then it actually becomes simpler to write the code to just always do 1. And that makes some of these even more interesting to look at. So I think I will take a look at it as well and see if I have further opinions.
Cool. Okay. So we'll come back around to it. Is there any other than having some people just raising awareness again about it, Dave, sir? And if you can try to see if you can help pull in anybody would be aligned with it and would actually need this feature. Is there anything else that you kind of wanted to cover here, or is that good and we can kind of follow up async?
That's good.
Yeah, just following up on that, Istio has always been interested in this, but I think we're going to go from passive interest to an extremely active interest, pending some discussions in the coming days. So we'll be a big advocate of this as well.
I also think Envoy has this feature, but not.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I think Envoy Gateway has this feature.
Yeah, so we were really interested in this feature, and we went ahead and added a knob at the gateway class level, like a boolean that says merge gateway, and that's how we implement it. So it's a very common ask from all our users. I can share the link so that we can add it.
Yeah, it's basically a thing where pretty much all of the Ingress controllers can do a similar thing to this before Gateway API came along. So
yeah. Cool. All right. We have 10 minutes left. I think we'll have enough time for Lior stuff. I don't know if we'll make it to triage, but that's okay. Lior, go ahead and tell us about your project ideas for CNCF LFX Spring.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like had a idea recently. Someone from saw some lecture from someone that working on Prometheus that had this experience with LFX mentoring, and I just wanted to see whether we have some kind of projects in Gateway that we want to do. So one of the things that came up first in my mind is the presentation layer for conformance reports. We asked a couple times in in those kind of meetings for front end people that want to do it, but I don't know, maybe we could propose this idea, and basically, I don't know, it's just this bullet is just to gather ideas if some people have ideas for some kind of things, and then I kind of look together with other folks to do this, to propose this mentorship, and the deadline for proposals is March 11th. So yeah, if someone has
Yeah.
Call out.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the ideas, not to put Gaurav on the spot here, but he's, with the gap that he's created for Gateway Cuddle, there's a long list of work items that are coming up basically on that front and could benefit from help. So that may be one option. I'm sure there are others, but I really like the idea of having, going through this process and getting someone through the mentoring program, or maybe multiple people.
One thought there, given the deadline is March 11th, can we start early on as well? I mean, whoever we are mentoring, or is the expectation that whoever joins us will be after March 11th?
Yeah, probably after March 11th. So March
Okay.
11th is the deadline for putting the proposals in, and then probably CNCF kind of market this a little bit, and then there's this selection process. So it's kind of more.
I see. Thank you.
So so it sounds like we might end up with somebody to help, say, over the summer.
Yeah, for sure. It's for the summer.
Okay.
Like May.
Okay,
I
great.
think it's kind of May starts.
Okay, great. So just if we have an idea of what we're going to need help with in May, then this could be very helpful. Cool.
All right. And then you wanted to talk about Ingress to Gateway extension support.
Yeah, so there's this nice issue that Arco opened, and I wanted to see what other people thought, and maybe Arco could give a little bit more clarification about what he meant with the example with Istio. But yeah, it feels like I wanted to see whether we want to target this for next release. It feels like a really important piece of work. But yeah, if Arco is here on the call and you want to shed some more light on this, and then like we could get other implementers' opinions, that would be great.
Sure. I think I raised this issue to kind of capture the need, the desire for the end user to convert entire user intent from input to output. But the Istio case, I believe Istio, and I need to cross-check this, but there's a way you can add a target ref to like an authorization policy. That's not there by default. So I think tools like this could help translate that. For the Envoy Gateway case, you could convert input intent into Gateway API extensions like policies that we have in Envoy Gateway, such as backend traffic policy and client traffic policy, and to convert input fields that don't have a place today in the V1 API. And eventually, this translation keeps getting iterated, and once fields are added in the Gateway API, the extension code gets deprecated and removed.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is awesome. I'm a big proponent of this with some limitations. The biggest thing that I want to avoid here is copying annotations from Ingress to Gateway. That is very much a goal of Gateway API, is to get away from the annotation sprawl that we ended up with Ingress. But if we're translating annotations from Ingress to proper Gateway API extensions, whether those are custom filters, whether those are gateway API policies that follow the one of the policy attachment modes that we've outlined. I think that's great. I just would strongly argue against copying annotations from one API to the other here.
Yes, so I think, and Arco, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the idea is more of like, I mean, the idea whether annotations are kind of copied, their logic into gateway extensions are kind of independent than converting resources like ingress and so the repo is calling ingress to gateway, but it's like, ingress and implementation specific resources to gateway. So I think it's more target like, authentication policies, whatever is supported in policy and gateway extension, which is good. But there's different discussion whether like everything should be a gateway extension or not. But I think our infrastructure supports this right now, like not extensions, but like definitely per provider outputs and schemas. So we'll just need we'll just need some implementers that have a real use case that basically going to implement the conversion itself, and it's just like implementing it, and yeah, like there is all the interfaces are there already. So yeah, like it'll be great if some people come up with examples and put it in, and yeah, if someone starts, I think this can help kicking this off.
Awesome. But like for the Istio case, right? I think it does translate. It does take a virtual service as an input, right?
Yeah, correct. So Istio already, Dimitri already added support for it. So Istio is done like basic plus, but it's not like, I don't know any extensions, gateway API extension supported by Istio. I've never heard of it. I tried to look at the documentations, but apparently across all providers, like in implementations, the policies are not well documented. So it's really hard to find. But I didn't find anything in Istio with policies. So if you know of some policies and extensions within Istio and a good use case, so it might be a good place to start.
I think John's here. So John can ODSI policy, can the ODSI authorization policy API be used as a policy extension, gateway API extension?
So in general, Istio has a lot of APIs that use our own attachment mechanism. That is a workload selector instead of target ref, which is functionally very, very, very similar. It's just a syntax difference. So I would consider all of those policies. That being said, for all of those, we did also just merge in the most recent version the standard target ref syntax as well. So basically, that's every single Istio API with the exception of gateway, virtual service, and destination rule, which are kind of the three odd ones out. But yeah.
Awesome. So a tool like this will allow a user to translate Istio input to Istio output and make it completely gateway API spec friendly. So
yeah, as long as it outputs gateway API extension, like the extension, and the extensions is in a form of like a resource. So I think yeah, it's definitely doable. But someone needs to write a conversion logic.
yeah, awesome. Thanks for raising this, Leah.
Yeah,
no
thank
problem.
you.
Yeah.
We are out of time, or we're in like the last minute, so I don't think we're going to have time for anything else. But if you're interested in that issue, that's over in the Ingress to Gateway repository, and that's issue number 125 for supporting gateway API extensions, in parentheses, output providers. Thank you for bringing that up. Yep, so we're basically at the top of the hour. I know I have a hard stop, so we're going to call it here. We'll try and do triage next time if we have some time. If there's anything that bubbled up that you wanted to talk about today, make sure to put it on the agenda for next time. Thank you all, and we'll see you next week.